days after the Lee family had settled into their new abode, nestled amongst the pines, they are confronted with paranormal happenings. Initially, the disturbances seem harmless, as the couple's two young sons began to voice concerns about peculiar lights flickering in their rooms and eerie shadows dancing across the walls. But the situation takes an ominous turn when Steve and Beth themselves bear witness to disturbing and terrifying events. This is the untold story of the haunted house of the Black Forest in Colorado. There's an undeniable, almost supernatural call to the eerie and the unexplained that seems to emanate from the depths of dense woodlands. The Black Forest, a vast expanse of towering trees and shadowy undergrowth, has been a breeding ground for creepy tales of the otherworldly. Amidst this foreboding landscape lies a dilapidated house, its weathered walls and creaking floorboards harboring secrets that have captured the imagination of paranormal enthusiasts across the nation. This isolated dwelling, nestled deep within the Colorado wilderness, has earned a reputation as one of the most haunted sites in the United States. Its very existence a testament to the enduring power of mystery and the unknown. The region referred to as the Black Forest is an unincorporated area situated in El Paso County, Colorado, nestled near the city of Colorado Springs. This area was traditionally known as the Pineries, a vast expanse spanning over 1,000 miles, aptly named for the dense concentration of majestic ponderosa pine trees that blanketed the landscape. The Black Forest's remote and secluded nature, coupled with its towering evergreens and rugged wilderness, has long captivated those seeking solitude and a connection with the untamed beauty of nature. The secluded log cabin, nestled deep within the Black Forest region of Colorado, seemed like a tranquil oasis for the Lee family when they first laid eyes on it in 1991. Stephen and Beth, along with their two sons, had relocated from Louisiana, seeking a serene escape amidst the towering pines and pristine wilderness. The sparsely populated area, known for its slow-paced lifestyle, crisp air, and breathtaking vistas, promised a dream home surrounded by untouched nature. Little did they know that this idyllic retreat would soon become a source of inexplicable occurrences and unsettling experiences that would forever alter their perception of the supernatural. About the Lees. Stephen Lee, a father, husband, and truck driver, had done well for his family. And wanting a change of scenery, they found what they believed to be their dream home. A 6,000 square foot, 3-story cabin located within the Black Forest. Situated on 5 acres of land, Stephen and his wife Beth, with every step as they surveyed the property, could envision their 2 young sons playing and growing up there, their own little piece of the American dream. So, it took a little bit of time, but their offer on the home was ultimately accepted, and within the coming months, they would soon call this secluded place home. However, they would fail to realize that it wasn't just inhabited by the family of 4. The first week at their new residence seemed like something out of a fairy tale, Mom, Dad, and the kids were all comfortable and very happy after making the long trek from Louisiana to Colorado. And the family themselves seemed happy and content with their decision. However, this would change. The Lees' 2 young sons shared a room, as brothers often do at a young age. And roughly after their first week, they began to tell their parents that something strange was happening in their bedroom. Bright, colorful lights flashed about, and terrifying, shadowy specters flowed across their walls. These strange happenings frightened the boys and often kept them awake. So of course, they told their parents. However, often in these situations, they were dismissed. Beth and Steve simply believed that the boys had overactive imaginations and figured it would just take time for them to adjust to their new environment. But this too would change mere weeks later. Upon coming home from an evening of fun as a family, they would arrive to see their home lighting inside with strange, lightning-like flashes of light. They could see the spectacle from their driveway. In the words of Beth, "One day we came home and it was like the 4th of July in our living room and bedroom. We had all sorts of colorful flashes of light seemingly everywhere. We rushed inside to figure out just what these things were, and simultaneously, it sounded like people were stomping across our roof. Then all of a sudden, it stopped." Never having seen anything like this before, the Lees were simply perplexed. And not sure of what to make of this activity, they would lay their heads down to sleep this night. But what they failed to realize is that this was just a prelude of what was to come. In the coming months, the activity grew in intensity. What started as phantom lights and flickering shadows had escalated into something taking place almost every single day. From disembodied banging sounds to whispers, the sound of chains dragging on the floor, or even inside the walls, to pushing, assaulting, and disturbing the family. Sadly, the Lees' young sons were more often than not the targets of this paranormal force that plagued them. Night after night, and almost every night, they were harassed by shadow people, the reappearance of the mysterious lights, and the awful banging sounds of something unseen. The family did their best to make the situation work. They, after all, were newly tied up financially in the purchase of what they believed was going to be their forever home. But it was something big or small nearly every day now that was taking place. During the day, appliances began to turn on and off on their own accord. This was attributed to an electrical issue at first, but after having the home examined by multiple electricians, they found no faulty wiring. Alongside electrical appliances, faucets began to turn on by themselves, often making a wet mess in whatever room they were activated in. During the night, the reemergence of the lights, the movement of the shadow people, and the sounds truly haunted them. And these disturbing happenings were soon coupled by something new and equally terrible. A noxious, chemical odor began to appear in the home with no rational origin. The smell of these mystery chemicals burned the nose, eyes, and throats of everyone whenever it appeared. In the coming days, yet more professionals would be called out, and yet nothing, no origin of the chemicals or detection of them either, could be found. It seemed that whatever force that dwelled within the walls of the cabin home in the woods had a particular hatred for the Lee family. And this force soon began to physically hit all of them, seemingly whenever it could, often leaving bruises. Not a believer in the paranormal, Steve Lee, having had professionals come out and not provide any rational answers to their strange ailments. This, coupled with the now daily torment that he and his family were enduring, had finally reached his wit's end. He wanted to prove that either there was someone or something messing with them. And over the coming year, he invested in a total of $70,000 worth of camera equipment and security equipment to monitor every square inch of their home and property. Now, you might think that that's an incredible amount of money to spend on cameras and alarm systems, and it is. But this was the 90s. The equipment wasn't as readily available or sophisticated as it is today, and it just goes to show that they were truly freaked out by whatever was taking place. That they wanted some kind of tangible proof that they could show the world so people didn't think that they were crazy. The cameras, which were mostly motion activated and would record when motion was detected, soon began to activate with no rational explanation and no physical means to be detected. After capturing several strange things on video and photograph, Steve decided to contact the local authorities for help. Records show that the El Paso police were contacted so often by the Lees in the months to come that they launched a formal investigation into just what was taking place at the cabin home in the Black Forest. During this time and the 2 years to follow, alongside the cameras, their security equipment, which could detect motion and forced entry, was triggered 62 times with no explanation as to what could be causing it. It wasn't faulty equipment or poor installation. It was oddly something else, something unexplainable. With not even the police able to rationalize what was happening to the Lees, Beth and Steve decided to take things one step further. They hired a private investigator. This was in part due to the police also growing tiresome of being contacted for assistance, and then there being nothing that they could do about it. Between the cameras and security equipment, and now hiring a private investigator, the Lees had all but spent the rest of their life savings. Most people, if it ever came to this, would simply try and cut their losses and sell the home. And we don't know if the Lees could have sold the home and moved elsewhere, but they truly still believed that this massive cabin home was their dream home, and they didn't want to give it up without a fight. Unfortunately, though, the private investigator was unable to help them. This left the Lees to simply tough out anything and everything that they had and were continuing to experience. After moving in 1991, the year now was 1995, and the activity had persisted despite the efforts of the Lee family to uncover just what was causing it. Steve, who still figured there had to be a rational explanation for what was taking place, had a little bit more of an open mind after a lengthy discussion with Beth. Seemingly having done everything else, the Lees concluded that they would try and contact paranormal investigators to see if they could do anything about the otherworldly happenings taking place in their home. After some research and calling numerous numbers, the Lees ended up getting in contact with a person who would end up being involved with the television show Sightings. Sightings was an American paranormal and news show that aired throughout the 1990s, covering various unexplained and fringe phenomena. As a result of this pretty lucky interaction, The show became very interested in producing an episode segment about hauntings surrounding the investigation of the Lee home. The show would contact a paranormal investigator and a self-proclaimed psychic in Minneapolis, Minnesota, named Echo Bodine. From her book, The Little Book of True Ghost Stories, Echo would explain her experience as the following. I got a call from the TV show Sightings, and they wanted to know if I would fly to Colorado Springs to help a family deal with some ghosts. The producers told me that the problem was the ghosts mostly seemed to come out at night, so I was asked to work from midnight until the early daybreak hours. It was a very hot day in mid-July when I arrived in Denver around 10 p.m. It was pretty eerie. There was intense lightning all throughout the sky and rain pouring down. I remember thinking how perfect the spooky weather was for investigating hauntings. Steve, the owner of the log home, was at the airport to pick me up. He was very open about not believing in ghosts. And as we drove through several towns in Colorado, I listened to him tell me story after story about some of the things that had gone on in their house. They heard voices, footsteps. Things would move from room to room. It took close to an hour to get up to their house in the mountains. And alongside the rain, a fog hung about 10 feet off the ground. When we arrived and I entered their 3-story log cabin home, from here I was greeted by a producer who asked me if I could take a seat while the scientist they had hired told us about his thermal camera. Having been tired from the trip, I laid my head back while the explanations were continuing. And suddenly, I heard a voice come from behind me. It said, "Hey, come here." Upon turning around, I saw a large ghostly man. About 6 feet tall, the specter was wearing blue jeans and a blue checkered flannel shirt. I then heard in unison multiple voices tell me to look over here. And now there was 5 male spirits, all different, but dressed the same as the first. The original ghost said that his name was Tom, and that this was his house, and that no one was going to make him leave. He ran the show around here and had for a long time. I told the producer what was happening in case he wanted to capture anything for the segment, and he did. The conversation then ensued, with Tom explaining why he and the boys wanted to stay in the house, that it was his land, his home, and that he would not leave. One of the cameramen then asked if it was one of them who had been responsible for knocking over his very expensive camera off the countertop. All 5 in unison answered yes, and then disappeared out of sight. The scientist with the thermal camera did in fact capture a drop in temperature just right where Tom had stood. Around 2 a.m. in the morning, as me and Beth discussed the activity that she had experienced, the dogs the family owned would not stop barking outside. The producers, in an effort to keep their sounds from being picked up on the camera, tried to quiet them down, but simply weren't having any luck. Then, upon Beth showing me a photo of what they had captured on their own cameras, we suddenly were in the midst of 3 male spirits. One with a particularly angry scowl upon his face. One of them walked through both of us, causing us to jump out of our chairs, while the other, angry-looking spirit tried to take my breath away. I believe he did this to stoke fear from me in order to grow more powerful, and this worked because I felt as if I was being suffocated. By 3:30 a.m., we all decided to not focus on ghosts for a bit and to try and lighten the mood. We turned the cameras off and began eating some food in which Beth had prepared for us. But almost as soon as we began to relax, one of the camera women who had been sitting on the stairs began to hyperventilate. She then jumped up and screamed, "Get it out of me," as she fell down the stairs and onto the floor, writhing in pain. The producers asked for me to do something, so with the assistance of others, I helped her up and into a chair in the kitchen, and I began to burn sage, encircling her in the smoke. I asked her to say back to me that she was clear until she calmed down. It took about 20 minutes, but she eventually relaxed. She then was given a ride back to the hotel, and I never saw or heard from her again. By now it was 4:30 a.m., and we were waiting for the camera crew of the show to finish setting up their equipment in the bedrooms, where the majority of activity was seeming to take place. One of Steve's friends, who had been present most of the night, came up and handed me a brochure about the history of the local area. To my surprise, he told me that a man named Tom had been the sheriff here back in the 1800s. I felt shivers up my spine as I realized that this was the same Tom that now haunted the Lees' home. Roughly 5 a.m., as we set off to investigate the last bedroom, I walked into the room and saw there in the rocking chair in the corner who would turn out to be Beth's deceased grandmother. And on the opposite side of the room was Tom and the several male spirits under his control. We ended up burning sage and asking them all to move on to the other side. They all did leave the building, but I'm not convinced that they moved on. At about 6 a.m., we finally finished saging the entire house. Exhausted, we packed up our equipment and went back to our respective hotels. I've spoken to Steve and Beth since, and they informed me that activity at the cabin persisted shortly after our departure, and that although not fully convinced, Steve is convinced that there are things in this world that we will never truly understand. Sightings would do a follow-up episode segment years later with the Lees, where they brought in several spiritualists and an expert in hyperdimensional studies, and all would come to the conclusion that the home was indeed haunted. The expert would draw the conclusion that the home sat atop an interdimensional vortex, and coinciding with his conclusion, interestingly, a Hopi elder from the local area would also explain that the Black Forest sits on top what the Hopi call a rainbow vortex, a raging storm, a portal of sorts that contains great spiritual energy and the coming and going of many souls. Sometimes they burn out over time, and sometimes they don't. They are considered gateways between the world of the living and the spirit realm. Some strange and noteworthy things that took place during the second filming of the show's sightings at the Lees' residence was that a paranormal investigator had asked anyone if the name Howard bore any significance to them. The Lees were surprised because one of their best friends in Colorado Springs was a man named Howard. The entity then told the investigator, who relayed the information to everyone, that he was Howard's son, and that he in fact had not killed himself, but rather had been murdered. This disturbed the Lees a great deal because Howard's son had supposedly taken his own life by consuming deadly chemicals, working as a chemist. The stories and reputation of the home got such a local buzz from the press that even a Colorado senator by the name of Charles Duke visited the home with his own camera crew and would snap a few photographic pieces of evidence of apparitions, to his and everyone else's surprise. Senator Duke was so convinced of the Lees' haunting that he even contacted the FBI to conduct a formal investigation, but the Bureau would rebuttal with, no federal laws had been broken. Years later, after everything had happened, Steve Lee, who still wasn't fully convinced of the supernatural, came to his own conclusions as to what was taking place. And for the record, it's a wild theory. He began to believe that the government was using his family and their remote location to test biological agents and psychological weapons of war. He claims he has even photographed military personnel on his property with firearms, and claims that they may have been shutting off the electricity in his home so they could enter undetected. These claims, although far-fetched, would be incredibly disturbing if true, and it would account for the noxious odors the family said they were experiencing, as well as the lights and some sounds. But oddly enough as well, the Air Force Base is located just a few minutes away from where the Lees live. The Lees, as far as we know, after placing the home for sale in 2010, no longer live there. The current residents are unknown, but it seems as if the property has changed hands multiple times. Whether it was ghosts, the result of what the Hopi call a rainbow vortex, or more sinisterly, the result of government military black ops. The haunting of Black Forest, Colorado is truly an intriguing tale. And if you find yourself seduced by what you could consider your dream home, take caution, because this calling might just be a siren sound. Don't let them take you. Thank you guys so much for watching this brand new episode. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, leave me a comment, subscribe with notifications on, and please share this around online or with a friend. All that stuff helps me out tremendously. Another thank you to today's sponsor, Keeps. Make sure to check my link down below. I love all of you guys, and thank you so much for everything. Until next time, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. Could rebuilding your life cause destruction? Could it stir up an old evil? When a family loses their father in a blaze, the widow and her 2 children are looking for a fresh start. But after moving into what was supposed to be their next chapter, they soon would discover that they aren't its only inhabitants, as entities emerge from the walls to collect their very souls. Will they survive or be consumed by the darkness that surrounds them? This is the untold story of the demonic Long Island haunting, also known as the Long Island Terror of New York. This one, even for me, is such an insane story. Again, I will advise you to not watch this episode alone or in the dark. Please subscribe to the channel with notifications on and leave this video a like. Now, let's get to the content. Our story begins as a building blazes in the Bronx, New York. Firefighters, attempting to extinguish the blaze, had become trapped inside the 4-story complex, right at the very top. Sadly, all 6 of them are forced to choose between jumping or succumbing to the flames. Several of the men survive, and several do not. Lieutenant Curtis Mayran of Battalion 26, the husband of Jeanette Mayran, did not. Kurt wasn't just a firefighter, he was a family man, a loving husband, and a father of two. His passing was not only completely unexpected, but downright devastating to all those involved. The saddening events shatter any resemblance of a planned future that Jeanette foresaw. Following the tragedy, she had to tell her two girls that they would never see their father again. The two are inconsolable. To make things worse, every day following the public announcement of what had happened, her home has been besieged by the media. No care, no compassion. They just wanted a word and a picture to sell their latest headline. The harassment was constant during this time, so thinking of how to solve a crisis, Jeanette begins to ask herself, should she try and find a little small place somewhere for her and the girls to escape to start over at, to start fresh. With snow still melting outside, she takes them for a car ride one afternoon and seems to stumble across a deal that was an answer to her prayers. Located outside the city, and with the rarity of an acre of land, sits a rather large home. It will need some work, but she thinks she could make that happen. From the moment she lays eyes on it, Jeanette feels that this is the one. This could be a way to give her girls and herself a new life. She jumps on the opportunity, and to her bewilderment, her offer is accepted. Within a month, the Mayrans move from the home that Curtis built to a new home, a fresh start outside of the city. With the transfer of each bag and each box of belongings, they feel as if they're that much closer to peace, the thing that they really all wanted. The home, as mentioned, needed some restoration, but with Curtis being a firefighter, his brothers in service took it upon themselves to look out for his family. With all the manpower, the work should be done within a couple weeks. However, with the restoration of the home, devastation would follow. As the construction toils on, and unfamiliar with the area, with valuable tools being left around on occasion, as well as their own safety to worry about, Jen decides to put up security cameras to monitor things. In total, they have 7 cameras installed around the property. The first night that the cameras go live, Jen is curious just what all they can see and detect. So with this being new technology to her, she sits in the living room on her computer, tuning into just what was taking place outside of her walls. It's nighttime, and the cameras are in night vision mode, portraying black and white. As she clicks through the different cameras as the evening progresses, she doesn't see much. That was until in the middle of a frame, she sees a man. This man is standing and staring at her home. Given the quality of the cameras at the time, she didn't panic, thinking perhaps that her eyes were playing tricks on her. To be safe, she makes sure that the home is entirely secure and eventually relaxes enough to be able to try and get some sleep. As an icy wind blows outside and the light snow trickles down and coats the earth, Jeanette and her 2 girls lay in their beds. Her mother and sister are asleep to her knowledge, but Angela is particularly restless. She can't seem to sleep. Tossing and turning, she has an uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach. As she toils away in her room, she is suddenly interrupted by a strange banging sound. As she sits up and listens, she hears it again. However, these thumps or knocks seem to be originating from inside the walls. Turning on her lamp and standing up out of bed, Angela begins to investigate as the noises progress in intensity. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to her, her younger sister Deneen is woken up by the sound of someone banging on the outside of her closed bedroom door. Calling out to whoever was there, she is met with the reply of silence. Finding this strange to say the least, and confused after being woken up out of a sound sleep, the young girl gets out of bed slowly and apprehensively makes her way towards the door. As she turns the knob and peers through the opening, she soon swings the door open to reveal nothing. Just an empty hallway leading to her sister's room across the way. At the same time, her sister Angela is still investigating the sounds coming from within the walls of her room. The banging has become more rhythmic, more aggressive. It seems as if someone or something is trying to get her attention. The sounds have been moving around her room, and trying to pinpoint its location, she walks up to the wall beside her dresser and slowly places her ear close to the wall to listen. The banging, instead, has found her. With eyes wide, she steps back from the wall as the mysterious sound continues. Deneen, meanwhile, unable to hear her sister's situation, closes her door and sits back on her bed. And almost as soon as she sits down, the knocking begins again. But this time, it's shaking her entire door. Scared, she rushes to put her head under her covers. As each situation crescendos late into the night, the two poor girls are terrified, and needless to say, they don't end up getting much rest. The activity seems to cease at dawn. The following morning, as their mom serves them breakfast, she notices that her two girls look exhausted. Asking what was going on with them, she is soon met with a series of questions, such as, was she the one knocking on the walls or on their doors? Was she walking all around the house? And did she do these things all night long? Unsure of what to make of this, Jeanette hadn't heard anything throughout the night. She chalks it up to the girls dealing with the emotions of everything, moving homes, and experiencing a new environment. She hoped that with due time, they would warm up to the house, and all would be well. The girls don't fully express their fear for lack of belief from their mom. So for this morning, they continue to eat their breakfast together and try to move on to another topic. As the girls go about their day, Jen would go upstairs to her girls' rooms and investigate, but would uncover nothing out of the ordinary. The renovations would continue, and soon the firemen would find themselves within the basement of the home, described as unique, with lots of debris. They demolish old boards and clear things out. As work toils on, the girls examine the backyard. They've never seen an area so big, and although it's freezing outside, they've opted to explore. However, they began to discover some strange things about their new playground. They first noticed strange symbols carved into numerous trees on the property. Unsure of what to make of this, as kids do, they use their imaginations. They decide that they want to design a map to help them hide things. They will use these stars, as they call them, as markers on their map. The two continue to explore and soon make another, even stranger discovery. What appears to be several chipped bones tied together with a lace-like material is dangling from a low-hanging branch of one of the trees. Thinking it was really weird, but again, unsure of what to make of it, The two continue to play. As previous items, debris, and old demolition waste is removed from the basement, those firefighters volunteering soon make a discovery of their own. There, underneath the old floorboards, etched into the concrete below, is an inverted pentagram. They soon call Jen to take a look. Curious as to just what it could be, she comes down and sees it for the first time. As she glances at it, she begins to feel sick to her stomach. She instructs the men that she would like it covered back up, that she didn't want the girls to see it. The men would agree and simply lay new concrete over it. This way, her girls will never even know that it was there. The girls, however, still playing outside in their winter wonderland, soon make yet another discovery. They begin to find several more stars made out of bones upon the ground. Thinking this was part of some game, they soon incorporate them into their play as well. Oh, the innocence of a child. Several days later, Jen has returned to work and has left Angela in charge of her younger sister. Angela has also been tasked with cleaning up the house. As she makes her way around, checking off her list, she feels as if she's not alone. She keeps looking over her shoulder, but nothing seems to be there. Turning once again to get back to cleaning, within seconds, she hears an ear-shattering noise. Her eyes shoot to the origin of where she believed the sound had come from, and the poor girl can't believe what she's seeing. The entire kitchen has been flipped upside down. Pans and dishes thrown out of their cabinets. Silverware that was inside the drawer is now all over the place. And not knowing what else to do, she screams and flees. Hours later, Jen, upon arriving home from work, walks into an eerily quiet house. In her own words, "When I walked inside, everything was very quiet. I glanced into the kitchen, and every cabinet, every drawer was emptied. The place looked like it had been ransacked. I called out for Angela, but got no response." Thinking her daughter had had a tantrum of sorts, Jen goes on the hunt for Angela after not receiving a verbal response from her. Running up the stairs, she finds her holding a stuffed animal and staring blankly ahead in her room. When confronted, Angela tells her mother what had happened, and thankfully, Jen believes her. She recognizes the sincerity in her child's eyes and voice. The following day, when both of the children are out, Jen greets a few workers down in the basement who are putting the finishing touches on things. One of them had found something while working. It was several old-looking pieces of paper tied together with some kind of white lace. Handing the papers to Jen, she begins to unfurl the pages. The opening date goes back to the year 1927, the year that the home was originally built. Scouring the pages for more information, from what she gathers, Jen makes out that the person who wrote this diary of sorts seems to be a young girl, perhaps the daughter of someone who had lived at the house in the past. As she continues to read, she finds out that the girl's name was Christina, and Christina's story took a rather dark turn. Within the diary, she began to describe how her father would hurt animals upon a star in the basement, and the descriptions became darker and more graphic as the pages progressed. Disturbed by what she had just read, Jen decides that no one needs to know about what went on here. That if the things written were true, that the past tenants were very sick people, and she, now living there, wanted to wash her hands of all of their doings, and pretend essentially that nothing happened in this place that her and her children now call home. And who can blame her? Except some things don't stay buried. The following day, as Jen is cleaning house, she is suddenly startled by a massive boom that rocks the entire house. Shocked initially by the unexpected blast, she realizes that it's coming from the basement below her. Worried that something had exploded, she apprehensively makes her way to the door and with flashlight in hand, slowly begins her descension down the stairs. Reaching the concrete floor, she scans the room for any signs of what could potentially have caused the commotion. Stepping forward and peering around, her flashlight suddenly dies. Jen then begins to feel as if the oxygen in the room is being consumed at a rapid pace, and an overwhelming sense of dread begins to overtake her. Running up the stairs as fast as she can and slamming the door behind her, she felt as if she was in the presence of pure evil. Still worried and not knowing if it was something to do with the plumbing or what have you, Jen needs to address the potential cause, but is too frightened to continue, so she lays it on the back burner, so to speak. Later that night, after she's fed the family dinner, Jen is busy cleaning up, while Angela is in her room and Deneen is taking a shower. Angela, who had been sitting on her bed and reading a magazine, suddenly begins to hear the faintest of whispers. It sounds like multiple people whispering at once from a distance. Perplexed, the child gets up and attempts to seek the origin of where these mysterious whispers are coming from. As she steps towards her door, the whispers grow louder, to the point to where some discernment is possible. The whispering seems to be a back and forth conversation amongst two people, but in a very secretive manner. Sounding like it's just outside of her door, Angela throws the door open, only to reveal nothing but the hallway. And as she does this, the whispers simultaneously cease. Perplexed further, she closes the door and begins to head back to her bed, but the whispers start again. Heading back towards the door, she listens in on the two again, and this time she begins to hear the name of her sister mentioned in this secretive conversation. Meanwhile, as Angela is having her own experience, Deneen, who is showering, began to have her own experience as well, feeling as if she was being watched, but trying to shake the feeling off. She tries to finish her shower, but hearing the bathroom door creak open puts the poor girl on edge. Calling out of the steam-tinted glass, asking if it was her mother or Angela who had entered the bathroom, she is soon met with something horrifying. Although blurred by the steam on the glass, she sees the silhouette of a large creature. This thing appeared to have pointed ears and grotesque features. The scared young woman is reduced to terror in the corner of the shower, screaming for her mother. Across the hallway upstairs, Angela, who had overheard what sounded like two people whispering about her sister, pulls the door open when she hears her sister's cries and rushes towards the bathroom. At the same time, Jen also runs upstairs, startled by the cries of her daughter. They try to open the bathroom door, but it won't budge. It's seemingly locked from the other side. As the women frantically try to get inside to save Deneen, she continues to scream for them as this creature presses its face and hand against the glass, unveiling black, rotting skin, yellow eyes, and sharp teeth. Finally, the door opens, as if the unseen hands keeping it closed vanished. Rushing inside to assist the poor girl, they find her shaking, with the shower still running. Turning off the water and placing a towel on her, Jane quickly gets all of them out of the bathroom. But now, as they stand in the hallway, all of the doors within the home that were open close on their own. Simultaneously, a dark, demonic chanting begins to fill the house. As it grows louder and more oppressive, as if some abomination from their worst nightmare was inching ever closer, the fear amongst them exponentially grows. Running to Jen's bedroom, opening the door, and rushing inside before closing the door behind them to barricade themselves from whatever was approaching, Jen holds the door shut in case whatever this thing is tries to come inside. With all three of them in hysterical tears, they begin to cry for their father, Jen's husband, their slain protector. Something begins to slam into the door, trying to break it down. As the noise outside intensifies, all three of them are desperately calling out for Curtis, although they don't feel his presence. Just as quickly as it had begun, the evil outside of the door and all of its chaos abruptly stop. The following day, desperate to talk to someone, but feeling like she'd be judged for being crazy, Jen contemplates who she can confide in. A longtime friend of her husband, named Tony, had been there for her and the girls since everything had happened. If anyone was going to believe her, it would be him. So, she gives him a call, and within a half hour, he arrives at the house. After sitting down together at the kitchen table, Jen explains everything to him, from the discovery of the pentagram in the basement to what they had been experiencing, and especially the horror that had taken place just the night before. After hearing Jen's synopsis, Tony decides to go into the basement to take a look around. After guiding him to the door, Jen refuses to go down with him. So after being handed a flashlight, Tony descends the stairs alone. In his own words, he didn't fear much in life, but while in the basement, he couldn't help but get the feeling that something was watching him, as if there was an oppressive atmosphere of sorts. He had trouble breathing and wanted to get out of there as soon as he could. Suddenly, as he walks around, he is spooked by the sound of a door rattling. As he approaches the door, the rattling continues, further unnerving Tony. Not wanting to delay the inevitable, he decides to throw the door open, and when he does, he reveals an empty room. There is absolutely nothing physically there. Already freaked out, he steps outside of the small room that the door concealed, and the moment that he gets outside of the doorway, the door itself slams shut. It was with this extra action that Tony decides it's time for him to get the hell out of there. Tony, who who had worked over 25 years as a corrections officer, truly feared very little. But what he had experienced down in that basement that day rattled him to the core. He explains what happened to Jin, but decides to leave shortly after the experience. Moving forward to try and ease one another, while someone was showering, they decided to post someone outside of the door to keep the other company in case anything else happened. And interestingly, I've had to do the same thing in one of the homes that I lived in that was haunted. But that's a story for another day. But just so you know, I know exactly how they felt. With all of their money tied up in the house, Jen is desperate to try and find some kind of solution. Not a very religious person, but going on what she knew, she decides to call the Catholic Church for help. The following day, a priest arrives to assess the situation and conduct a blessing for the family. He not only agrees that there is something evil within the home, but strategizes with Jen on how to try and get rid of whatever this thing was. He conducts a blessing of the home, but also believes that it's important for Jen to find her inner faith and conduct blessings on a regular basis herself. So, he provides her with gallons worth of holy water, since the property is rather large, in which she places into spray bottles to try and cover every square inch of the home during these blessings. One night, after conducting her blessing, Angela, who had become fairly withdrawn given the stress and trauma of the situation she found herself in, went outside to the swing set they had in their backyard. With it being nighttime, Jen decides to keep an eye on her using the cameras that she had previously installed. As Angela contemplates life and swings by herself, it soon becomes apparent that she is not alone. Jen, who was occasionally looking up at the laptop screen where the cameras were being monitored, soon sees something strange. Surrounding Angela, out of nowhere, were several dark, hooded figures. Jen, whose heart had felt as if it was going to explode, rushes as fast as she can towards the back door and towards her daughter's location. Angela, who was unaware of the figures her mother had seen, had been keeping a steady, normal pace on the swing set, when suddenly she is thrust out of her seat at a furious pace, causing her to smack the snow-packed ground incredibly hard. Upon impact, she hears a horrendous crack. Crying out in pain and for her mother, Angela is greeted by Jen, who begins to throw holy water all around where the two are, screaming and cursing at the figures who had hurt her daughter. Scrambling to get her to their vehicle as fast as she can, Jen then drives her immediately to the hospital. Upon arrival and examination, they discover that her foot and ankle are shattered. The following day, after returning from the hospital, Angela now wears a boot on her leg and is forced to stay in bed, further isolating her and keeping her within the confines of the house. Things seem to be relatively okay during the day, but when the sun goes down, the home begins to come alive. One night, incapacitated in her room, and with Jen out running errands with her sister, Jen is alone on her bed. It's lightly snowing outside, and the moonlight is peeking through her blinds. She begins to hear a faint knocking noise originating from her closet. Looking over, she notices her mirror looks strange, almost liquid. She then sees something that strikes absolute fear into her soul. A charred, black, clawed hand begins emerging from her mirror, slowly and menacingly coming out more and more. Beginning to scream, Angela does the only thing that she can do because she can't physically run away. Not only is her foot broken, but the mirror is right in front of her door. She quickly throws herself onto the floor and rolls underneath her bed, pinning herself as far back against the wall as she possibly can. The smell of decay fills the entire room as a creature slowly comes out of the mirror. From Angela's perspective, all she can see now is the gnarled feet of this entity. As it steps towards the bed, Angela, grasping the home phone, frantically begins to dial her mother's number. On the other end, Jen picks up. She had been at the grocery store, but upon hearing her daughter's screams, she leaves everything and immediately rushes towards the house. But she is 45 minutes away, pleading with her daughter to pray as she speeds on the slick roads, desperately trying to get home. She then hears a horrendous scream, something unearthly, unlike anything she had ever heard before on the other end. And then the phone call drops. Angela, who had been uttering Hail Mary while on the phone with her mother, was suddenly met face to face with a demon. After rushing home as fast as she could, Jen opens the door to a dark and silent house. All the lights are off, and she doesn't hear anyone or anything. Running up the stairs to Angela's room, she doesn't see her. With tears streaming down her face, she fears that the worst has happened, that whatever this horror was had hurt her daughter. She then hears the faintest whimper coming from underneath the bed. It's Angela. She's so weak and feeble that Jen has to drag her out from underneath the bed. Relocating the girls to her room, Jen then searches for help online. She knows that her and the girls deserve a future, and at this rate, one of them may end up hurt again, or worse. She discovers the number of a paranormal investigator by the name of Liz. Calling the number out of desperation at approximately 3 a.m. at this point. Surprisingly, Liz picks up on the other end. After hearing Jen's harrowing story, she decides that she wants to help her and her family. Having researched the paranormal for over 15 years, she believes that she must conduct a cleansing of the home. So within several hours, shortly after daybreak, Liz arrives, accompanied by her friend and colleague, a woman who is a psychic medium by the name of Dawn Jolie. As soon as the ladies greet Jen at her door and step inside, Dawn begins to receive flashes of the past. She quickly believes that cults conducted many rituals within the home, specifically in the basement, information that she had not been given ahead of time. She believes that these dark cults communicated with and purposefully conjured demonic entities, that the recent renovations had disturbed all the energy within the home. And on a side note, ironically, I also have experienced this as far as renovations disturbing any energy that can be within a home. But again, I'll share this at another time. After discussing what she believed to have happened within the house, the ladies decide to lay a circle of salt around the property, the idea being that it forms a barrier of sorts that no spirit can cross in or out of. To Jen, this was the beginning of the final showdown with these malevolent forces. After laying the circle whilst praying, the three head back inside, where they light several bundles of sage. The three of them then, room by room, bless and cleanse, allowing the sage smoke to fill the air. Slowly but surely, they do this for the entire house until they ultimately reach the basement, the apparent epicenter and the origin of the demonic activity. Together, they descend the stairs, their chants of prayer filling the sage-saturated air. Continuing throughout the basement, they begin to hear what Jin and the children had previously heard, the loud chants, something in a language that they couldn't understand. And with each flick of holy water and prayer cast, they soon also begin to hear screams accompanying the chanting. And the whole episode slowly is reaching a crescendo. They finally approach the last space yet to be cleansed. The small room concealed by a door. The very same room that Tony had had his experience in. The door once again begins to violently shake. Wanting to finally end this, Jin approaches the door and throws it open, allowing the sage smoke to infiltrate the last remaining air of the home, while the three women prayed and flicked holy water into the space. Suddenly, flames erupted from the floor, revealing a screaming, charred, demonic figure within, but only for the briefest of moments. Almost as soon as the screams were finished leaving the women's mouths upon the sight of this creature, the fire would extinguish, and this long battle with the demonic would finally be over. The cleansing conducted by Liz and Dawn was indeed successful. Jen and her daughter still live in the home to this day. It just goes to show that evil forces that dwell just beyond the veil of this world have nothing but contempt for us. No tragedy, no sorrow can be grounds to be left alone, but rather they use these as exploits, ways to weaken, attack, and consume those who are the most vulnerable. This family banded together and were able to overcome the terror of the demonic, and for that, I commend them. It just goes to show that love truly does conquer hate. Before we go, I did just want to say a few words about this incredibly scary case. I want to say that everyone involved, but especially Jen, Angela, and Deneen, not only given everything that they had gone through with the passing of Curtis, but everything as a result of the horrendous haunting, truly had strength. They endured it all, pressed on, and fought for their house and lives. And it just proves to me that these women were ridiculously strong and brave, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for them. I also hope that given all of the information that I could find, that I did their story justice with my version of it. I did also have just a few questions about the case itself. I'm curious just what cults could have been around the area at the time. Obviously, I tried to research these, but particularly regarding cults, or the occult in general, it's really difficult to find information, particularly on the internet, about a particular local group. You know, it makes you wonder what kind of rituals are being conducted, and for how long, just who exactly was behind them, as in the individuals, and just what entities they were attempting to connect with or conjure up, because it seems as though they were successful. I'm also curious if any of the bones that they ever found were human, or if they ever found any proof of human burial upon the land itself. All questions that we'll probably never have answers to, but questions that I had nonetheless. I did mention that I had a few experiences that were very similar to the experiences that this family had in this story. I will be making a video on what my paranormal experiences were, and the ones that kind of shaped me into the person that I am today, and why I started Mystery Archives in the first place. If you'd be interested in hearing them, please definitely let me know down in the comments, as well as your thoughts on this story as well. Please, if you like the video, leave it a like, subscribe with notifications on if you haven't already, and share this video around as much as you can. All that stuff truly does help me out tremendously. This story was also made famous by the show Paranormal Witness, which I would definitely recommend checking out for sure. I think they do a fantastic job of storytelling as well. I also have a community announcement that I've taken way too long to make. It's with a huge thanks to our mod Matthias here on the channel that we now have a Discord. Here we can not only chat as a community, but yours truly will be hanging out in here quite a bit. We've even got a pet chat which will allow us to share pics of our furry companions, which I'm stoked on, and so much more. It's also completely free, so please check the link below in the comments and or the description of this video, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with you guys. Aside from this, guys, I love all of you. Thank you for allowing me to do what I do. And really, if it wasn't for you, I would just be some guy sitting at home making videos that I find interesting. So I truly, and I really do mean this, I truly appreciate you guys. As always, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there and take care. I'll see you next time. There are certain realms of the paranormal and unexplained that seem to capture our imagination more than others, weaving themselves into legend and folklore, yet occasionally emerging as potential realities. One such entity that appears to dwell solely in the realm of fiction and fantasy is the vampire. However, despite the seemingly mythical nature of these immortal blood-drinking beings, there are instances that surface as purported encounters with these creatures, and one such account allegedly occurred in the tranquil English countryside. It is a tale that has become a curious part of local lore and a historic anomaly still discussed to this day. This is the untold story of the Crogland Grange vampire. In the idyllic countryside of Cumberland, northwest England, this tale began unfolding in 1875. It was that spring when two brothers, Edward and Michael Cranswell, along with their sister Amelia, ventured to this region and temporarily took up residence in a modest single-home stone farmhouse known as the Crogland Grange, overlooking the picturesque valley and nestled near an ancient churchyard. The property, owned by the Fisher family, seemed to draw the siblings in. Initially intending a brief stay, the Cranswells found themselves captivated by the serene rural life, swiftly becoming familiar faces among the locals. Their initial plans for a fleeting visit gradually dissipated as an inexplicable force seemed to compel them to linger. The townspeople, unaware of the undercurrents brewing beneath the surface, welcomed the siblings with open arms, oblivious to the veil that hid their true intentions. That sweltering summer, an ominous presence seemed to linger, casting a shadow over the quaint farmhouse. As the relentless heat wave persisted, Amelia found herself tossing and turning, growing more and more uncomfortable. With the shutters flung open in a desperate attempt to coax in a cooling breeze, she lay awake, her gaze fixated on the inky blackness that shrouded the trees beyond. It was then that something caught her eye, a faint flickering that danced among the branches, gradually intensifying as it drew nearer. 2 pinpricks of light weaved their way through the darkness, their approach sending a chill down Amelia's spine despite the stifling heat. A sense of foreboding gripped her, an inexplicable dread that she could not explain. As the eerie lights drew closer, Amelia felt the dread growing and enveloping her, a thick and palpable fear that gripped her very being. The source of the flickering illumination emerged from the shadows behind the window pane, revealing a grotesque visage, a hideous brown face with blazing eyes that leered menacingly at her. Its clawed hands began to scratch at the glass, desperate to gain entry, though fortunately the window remained locked. Amelia found herself paralyzed, her voice trapped in her throat, unable to utter a sound as she trembled in silent terror, transfixed by the monstrous entity outside. As the creature's attempts to open the window escalated, from mere scratches to peeling away the lead that sealed the pane's edges, Amelia's mind raced with unspeakable horrors, unable to comprehend just who or what sought to breach her sanctuary. When the window pane shattered onto the floor, a bony, claw-like hand reached through, deftly unlocking the latch from within. Amelia's voice remained trapped, still paralyzed, as a towering, shadowy figure glided across the room. It seized her in its embrace, grasping her hair and forcibly yanking her head back, exposing her vulnerable throat. Despite her desperate attempts to move or cry out, she thus remained petrified, helpless against this monster. As the creature bent down, its teeth poised to pierce her flesh, the searing pain finally unleashed a piercing scream that echoed throughout the night. Jolted awake by their sister's terrified cries, Edward and Michael Cranswell sprang into action, rushing towards Amelia's room. With a forceful thrust, they broke down the door, only to witness a chilling sight. That shadowy figure swiftly escaping through the shattered window. Without hesitation, one of the brothers grabbed a fire poker and gave chase, determined to confront the intruder. However, the entity moved with an unnatural swiftness, its strides unnervingly long and inhuman, as it leapt over the ancient church wall, disappearing into the night's embrace. The brothers were left bewildered and unsettled. Amelia, shaken and bleeding from her neck, recounted the harrowing ordeal. Initially, she attributed the attack to a deranged individual, perhaps an escaped asylum patient. Her mind unable to comprehend the true nature of the assailant. The notion of a vampire, a creature of myth and legend, seemed too fantastical to consider. Deeply concerned for their sister's well-being, the Cranswell brothers decided to whisk Amelia away from the once peaceful, now terrifying confines of the Croglan Grange. A long vacation in Switzerland, they hoped, would provide her with the respite and recovery she desperately needed, allowing her to regain her strength and put the traumatic experience behind her. As they departed, an air of uncertainty lingered, a sense that the tranquil countryside harbored a sinister presence, a force that defied rational explanation. The events of that night had left more questions than answers in their wake. When they returned to Croglan Grange the following autumn, the memory of that traumatic night did not leave the family with time. The siblings were determined to confront any sinister force that remained. The brothers meticulously arranged their sleeping quarters directly across from Amelia's room, ensuring a watchful eye over her safety. Pistols were strategically placed within reach, just in case the creature did rear its head again. Amelia, still bearing the scars of the original attack, diligently secured her shutters each evening, fortifying her chambers. For a time, an eerie calm seemed to settle the countryside abode, lulling them into a false sense of security. The winter months passed without incident. However, as the first blossoms of spring unfurled, the familiar cold wind heralded the soon return of the creature. One evening, Amelia's slumber was once again disrupted by the hauntingly familiar sound, a scratching and tapping against her window. Now fortified with shutters to shield her from the horrific visage that lurked beyond. Bracing herself for the worst, yet clinging to the hope that it was merely an animal's doing, she mustered the courage to peer through the narrow gap at the top of the pane, left uncovered by the shutter's protective barrier. There, hunched menacingly at her window, was the same wretched creature she had encountered before. Its shriveled, grotesque appearance and burning ember-like eyes glaring. This time, Amelia's voice did not fail her, and she screamed as loud as she could, a desperate cry that jolted her brothers into immediate action. They burst forth from the house, pistols loaded and ready. In a frantic pursuit, they allegedly managed to strike the creature in the leg as it fled, but its unnatural speed and agility allowed it to evade their grasp. Undeterred, it fled towards the nearby graveyard, disappearing into the depths of the ancient crypt again. The brothers knew that they couldn't face the creature alone. The previous night's encounter had shaken them to their core, and the realization that others in the area had experienced similar, harrowing visitations only added to the sense of unease that gripped them. Whispers of drained livestock and a young girl bearing inexplicable bite wounds spread like wildfire, fueling speculation that they were confronting a force beyond comprehension. The Cranswell brothers rallied the locals, imploring any able-bodied individuals to join their crusade. As the sun swept over the horizon, the small band of locals gathered, armed with an array of makeshift weapons, ready to confront the sinister creature that had plagued their once peaceful hamlet. Their footsteps echoing through the ancient graveyard as they approached the ominous crypt where the creature had sought refuge. The air hung heavy with a palpable sense of dread, as if the very stones themselves harbored secrets best left undisturbed. Yet, driven by a burning curiosity and a desire to restore tranquility to their community, they pressed on. As they neared the crypt's entrance, a hush fell over the group. The brothers exchanged a resolute glance, their grip tightening around their weapons as they prepared to venture into the abyss. As they crossed the threshold into the gloomy crypt, a chill ran down their spines, Their torchlight cast eerie shadows across the defiled graves. Coffins torn asunder, their contents strewn haphazardly across the stone floor. A sense of unease gripped them. Yet amidst the desecrated resting places, one coffin remained untouched. With bated breath, they pried open the lid, and what greeted them was a sight that would forever be etched into their memories. There, lying motionless within the confines of the coffin, was the very creature that had terrorized them. Its features now dulled, as if trapped in a trance-like state. A fresh bullet wound marred its leg, a testament to the brothers' earlier pursuit, but it seemed to have little effect on the entity's unnatural existence. Realization dawned upon them, a chilling certainty that they were indeed confronting a vampire, a creature of myth and legend, now made flesh before their very eyes. The whisper and tales that had once seemed like mere folklore now took on a terrifying reality. The brothers knew that they could not allow this abomination to continue its reign of terror. Swiftly, they set about gathering the necessary materials, determined to purge the entity from their midst once and for all. The crackling flames cast a glow upon their faces as they prepared to consign the creature to the cleansing fire, a ritual that would hopefully bring an end to the harrowing ordeal. As the flames licked at the creature's form, the brothers and their companions watched with a mixture of trepidation and relief, knowing that they had vanquished a force that had threatened to unravel the very fabric of their existence. The smoke curled upwards, carrying with it the lingering remnants of a mystery that had once seemed unfathomable, yet had now been laid to rest, forever etched into the annals of local lore. This rather dramatic and sensational tale was initially recounted by the English travel writer and author Augustus Hare, who included it in his multi-volume 1890s autobiography, The Story of My Life, under the section titled The Beast of Crogland Grange. The narrative reads like a chilling horror story, and given that Hare was known for publishing ghost accounts during an era when sensationally macabre and gothic pulp stories, known as penny dreadfuls, were popular, one might assume it to be a work of fiction. However, Hare presented it as a completely real and factual account, without any indication that it was a fabrication. According to him, he had personally heard the story in 1874 directly from the actual owner of Crogland Grange, Captain Edward Fisher Rowe, whose family had owned the property for generations. However, Hare neglected to cite many names or detailed locations or provide verifiable sources, leaving the reader to ponder the veracity of the events described. Since Hare never admitted that any part of it was fictional and consistently presented it as fact, the account has become a perplexing mystery, sparking endless debates as to whether any element of it is rooted in truth, or if it was a product of either Hare's or Fisher's imagination. One of the earliest skeptics to scrutinize this published work was Charles George Harper, an English author and illustrator. Harper embarked on a personal quest to Cumberland in 1924, determined to get to the bottom of the alleged events at Crogland Grange. However, his investigation yielded perplexing results. As Harper delved into the heart of the local community, he encountered a startling revelation. Not a single resident had ever heard of a place called Crogland Grange, nor could they recall any whispers of its existence. It seemed as though this location had vanished into the mist of time, leaving no tangible trace behind. Undeterred, Harper scoured the countryside, seeking any semblance of the dwelling described in Hare's account. The closest he could uncover was a structure known as Croglan Low Hall, yet its characteristics diverged significantly from the haunting depiction. Not only was it situated over a mile from the nearest church, but it stood as a 2-story edifice, defying the single-story description of the Grange. Moreover, the adjacent cemetery bore no evidence of the sinister crypt that had allegedly harbored the malevolent entity. Harper's quest to substantiate the existence of the Cranswell siblings proved equally fruitless. Despite his meticulous efforts, he could find no records or accounts that corroborated their presence in the region. Compounding this perplexity was the scarcity of clear information provided in Hare's narrative, rendering any attempt to trace their footsteps an exercise in futility. As Harper's investigation drew to a close, he found himself confronted with more questions than answers. The tale of the Croglan Grange vampire, once presented as an unvarnished account of a supernatural encounter, now stood as a tantalizing controversy, its origins and truthfulness lost to time. This cast significant doubt on the authenticity of the Croglan vampire tale, suggesting that it was either an intentional fabrication or an unintentional distortion of the truth. However, Harper's conclusions would face scrutiny in the 1930s when researcher F. Clive Ross embarked on his own investigation in Cumberland. Ross's findings painted a different picture, one that hinted at a kernel of truth buried beneath the layers of mystery. According to Ross's research, Croglan Low Hall was indeed the location Hare had described, though the property had since been demolished and a chapel erected in its place. Remarkably, remnants of the original structure remained, including the foundation stones of an ancient church and graveyard. The very same hollow ground where the sinister entity was said to have taken refuge. Even more compelling was the discovery of a bricked-up window, rumored to be the very one through which the vampire had first appeared, tormenting the unsuspecting Amelia. Ross's findings injected a newfound sense of intrigue into the narrative, suggesting that beneath the sensationalized elements, there may have been a genuine encounter that sparked the tale's origins. The existence of the church and graveyard lent credence to the idea that something inexplicable had transpired in this secluded corner of the English countryside, an event so profound that it interlocked itself into local folklore, evolving and transforming with each retelling. Was it a mere fiction, born from the fertile imagination of a storyteller, or did it represent a distorted recounting of a genuine paranormal event, its details obscured by the passage of time? The answers remained elusive, and the tale would continue to captivate generations to come. However, further investigations shed new light on the narrative. It was discovered that others in the region had indeed heard the story, an old, mostly forgotten local myth, and the Fisher family was very much real. One local resident even revealed that Croglan Low Hall had once been referred to as Croglan Grange until 1720, suggesting that although Hare may have mixed up the dates, at least some elements of this tale held true. This aligned with the findings of a journalist, Lionel Fanthrope, who in recent years concluded that at Croglan Grange and a vault matching the one in the story had existed in the 1600s. While the full scope of events remained obscured, the possibility that an inexplicable encounter had indeed transpired in this secluded corner of the English countryside. The tale and origin of the Crogland Grange vampire remains uncertain, while the evidence neither confirms nor denies the events described. The lack of concrete proof poses a significant challenge for those seeking to validate the existence of a bloodthirsty creature of the night stalking the English countryside in the 1800s. It is highly plausible that this account originated from an unreliable secondhand source, perhaps Fisher himself, who may have fabricated the story, drawn inspiration from sensational Gothic literature of the era, or distorted factual elements beyond recognition. Alternatively, it could be the work of pure fiction crafted by Hare, skillfully weaving real locations into a narrative presented as truth for dramatic effect, only to be misconstrued as a potentially genuine encounter in later years, taking on a life of its own. Or perhaps it was merely a mischievous jest, a playful attempt to captivate and perplex. The truth remains elusive, leaving us to ponder the possibility that something inexplicable transpired in this secluded corner of Cumberland, transforming with each retelling and baffling those who dive deeper. Thank you all for watching this latest video. Certainly let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Also, please give this video a like, share it around, and subscribe. All these things help me out a ton. Please also follow me on X, Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, and any other social media platform you may use. I'm probably there. Aside from that, guys, thank you again for allowing me to entertain you. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time. The oldest of native Hawaiian chants describe the Hawaiian Islands, the spirits that inhabit them, the forces of nature that shaped them, and all the living things upon them as inextricably connected, and perhaps the wisdom of the native peoples is true and not just folklore. When authorities are called to a residence for an incident, what they will see will shake them all to their core. A supposed entity with an insatiable hunger for blood and corpses makes its presence known. Are the infamous tales true? This is what we will discover as we dive into the untold story of the haunted Kasha House of Kaimuki, located in Hawaii. Beyond the waters of its beaches and the lush green canopies of its forests, the tropical paradise of the islands of Hawaii are an idyllic home or getaway for many. However, within the mists, shadows permeate, and where the veil is thin between our world and the next, those shadows sometimes whisper. In Japanese folklore, the creature known as the Kasha paints a terrifying picture. Its name translates to fire cart. It is a creature that is known to frequent populated areas, and where its diet consists of consuming the flesh of fresh human corpses. According to the lore, these creatures are a type of Bakineko, or a type of hellcat that lives among human beings under the guise of a common house cat or a stray. They are bipedal and larger than most people. When they make themselves known, they are accompanied by the flames of hell, and strong thunderstorms are left in their wake. It is only during funerals that their true forms are revealed, and as a result, they are known to snatch the corpses of the freshly deceased and spirit them away to hell for punishment, a type of grim reaper, if you will. Akasha will animate a corpse as a puppet to do its bidding, and then will consume it as the ultimate punishment for one's misdeeds in life. Our story begins around 1940 on Oahu, in Hawaii, in a large house that stands at 8th and Harding in Kaimuki, its foundation resting atop 2 beds of lava rock. The original story that began the infamy of the Kaimuki house tells of a young couple who moved into the home, hoping for a good and beautiful life together. But almost as soon as they moved in, this shared dream would deteriorate. The neighbors began hearing loud bangs and crashes almost every night. And as the episodes grew in intensity, and suspecting that perhaps domestic violence could be taking place, one of the neighbors called the police. When the police arrived and questioned the couple, instead of seeing one or the other upset or abused, they told them something else instead. They began to divulge to the officers that they were being attacked by something that they couldn't see. What happened to the young couple following this particular night is unclear, but what is known is that they moved out a short while after the incident. Sometime later, on August 13th, 1942, on this day, an article would appear in the Honolulu Star Bulletin newspaper, one that described a bizarre happening that had just taken place. And this incident was supposedly caused by the evil doings of Kahuna. For further context, in ancient Hawaii, treatment of the sick was based on the belief that poor health was caused by malevolent spirits or disease-producing demons. Illness was considered the result of sorcery, or in some cases, the ramifications of one's actions. Among the Hawaiians, there existed a group, the Kahunas, or those who were keepers of the secret, whose wisdom had been gained by divine guidance. Kahunas were grouped into various categories, some good and others bad, and sorcery was practiced by the group. It was known as the Kahuna Ananai. So essentially, Kahuna is a form of witchcraft with both white and black magic. On the night the article referred to, police officers were called to a house by a woman during a strong thunderstorm. During the call, the lady kept repeating, "She's trying to kill my children," over and over again. Her words kept being interrupted by loud crashes of thunder and what sounded like items being destroyed in the background. Upon arriving and entering the house, the officers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Those present began to witness something that was truly horrific. The woman who had initially called was screaming in the corner of the main room as her 3 children were levitating before her and everyone. Upon approaching them, the officers, as well as the children, would be slapped, pushed, and hurled across the room by a sinister, invisible force. The children were a brother and 2 sisters, ages 10, 18, and 20. The main officer in charge was a police sergeant. Prior to the call, the family began to smell a very strange odor, like that of sulfur permeating their home, and then the physical attacks began. As the force attacked those involved, the mother of the family ran into her room and returned with several items. She frantically began fanning tea leaves and began throwing salt towards the entity. After several minutes, her efforts seemed to work, as the children and the officer were released from the clutches of whatever this thing was. The family and the officer would vacate the premise following this night of horror. The woman who had called the authorities believed that the happenings were a result of black magic that had been placed on her by her ex-husband, whom she had recently left. This is no doubt probably the most famous stories surrounding the Kaimuki house, given the press it received in the various media outlets, but it certainly would not be the last. 30 years later, another incident would too garner the attention of the people. Another frantic late-night call had dispatched a patrol car in Kaimuki. The girls who lived there had supposedly heard strange noises of someone moving around and talking inside of their house. At first, thinking someone had broken into their home, they phoned the authorities. But following the call, the noises began to escalate in intensity. Then, one of the women felt the ice-cold grasp of a hand on her arm. The girls, all three, ran out of the home and sat in their car until the officer arrived. Upon hearing their story, he would go inside and check the home for an intruder, but would find no one. Deciding to spend the rest of the night with one of the girls' mothers, they asked the policeman to follow them to the mother's home to ensure their safety. As the girls drove in front of the officer, they began to erratically swerve from side to side, ultimately pulling into a vacant parking lot. Upon approaching the vehicle with concern, the policeman later wrote this in his report. As I approached the vehicle, I could see two of the girls screaming. The girl sat in the middle, in the back, was fighting a person that could not be seen. She was very clearly being strangled. I opened one of the back doors and reached into the vehicle, and to my shock, a big, strong, calloused hand that could not have possibly been that of a teenage girl grabbed my arm and twisted it. Upon freeing myself, I called for backup. The answering officer was certainly prepared for a parking lot fight, but not one with a ghost. Within minutes, the other officer would arrive, and with all the color drained out of his face, the original responding officer told him that there was a ghost in that car. By this point, all women involved had exited the car and were hysterical, crying and screaming. Continuing to quote the officer's report, I told the girl who had been choked to get in my patrol car and the other two women to ride with my fellow officer. But as soon as the young lady sat in my vehicle, which had stayed running during the incident, the motor died. It died and wouldn't start up again. Placing the girls back into their original car, the officer tried to start the vehicle again, and it started as if nothing had ever been wrong. Wanting to get these frightened girls home safe, the original officer and the responding officer agreed to continue to follow them, but upon pulling out of the parking lot, and almost as soon as they had driven about 5 yards, suddenly, one of the girls' vehicle's doors flew open, and the same girl who had previously been attacked was thrown out of the vehicle. Upon rushing to her position to check on her, she was again tearing at her throat and making noises as if she was being strangled. She had also incurred some road rash. Together, the two policemen were not strong enough to pull her hands away. Terrified and believing the matter to be a spiritual one of the officers ran into the nearby Oasis Cafe and came back with a handful of salt and a glass of water, which was spritzed upon everyone there. and as the drops touched the young woman, she finally was able to catch her breath again. In later interviews, the officer would tell the press that his grandmother had told him that this was a method to make ghosts go away, and perhaps his grandmother was right. Given the time frame in which these stories occurred, most involved may no longer be with us, so corroborating details is nearly impossible. But these tales have certainly made the Kaimuki house infamous. Now, there are several possible explanations as to why and how the home became haunted by whatever paranormal entity or entities. Again, details are scarce, but I've done my best to research and put together the most cohesive theories possible. The first theory refers to a father who, after his wife told him that she was going to leave him, decided to do the unthinkable and end the lives of his 2 children and his wife that still resided in the home. The wife and son's bodies were buried in the backyard, but the corpse of the daughter was never found. The second theory is that of a strange love triangle. A man was dating a woman who was dating another woman in secret without the man knowing. And upon his discovery of his girlfriend's secret affair, he decided to take the lives of her girlfriend, and ultimately himself within the walls of the Kaimuki house. The original house, from what I could gather, has since been demolished and another home built atop where it once stood. And one of the many questions I have is this home haunted just as the original home was? Was the haunting, if it existed at all, the result of vengeful spirits of those who had met their demise there? The result of a bloodthirsty entity known as the Kasha, who would do anything to feed upon the flesh of the freshly deceased? Or was it something else? Was it perhaps the result of native Hawaiian black magic being practiced on the premises or nearby? Or someone cursing another using this magic? We may never truly have the answers to these probing questions. But one thing is for certain. There was once a place that harbored darkness, a black void that existed in the heart of paradise, the supposed home of the angry souls of the dead, and possibly a creature from a world that is not our own. So if you see something that's beautiful on the surface, just know that one must be cautious, because something evil could be lurking just beyond the shadows. Thank you guys so much for watching this new video. Hawaii is such a beautiful and cool place, full of culture and history and folklore, and I thought it was time to pay some respect and cover a story that originates from one of the islands. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, leave me a comment, and share this video around as much as you can. All that stuff truly, and I can't say this enough, helps me out tremendously. Not to sound like a broken record. There are many episodes to come, including one I've been working on for a few months now that I'm really excited to share with you guys. And as a message to my newer subscribers, I do have over 100 past videos that you can check out if you enjoyed this one and want to dive into another paranormal mystery. And other than that, guys, I appreciate each and every one of you. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there and take care. Along a section of winding road, tall rustic gates harbor dark secrets. Not an adventure for the weak. This place is known for an abundance of evil activity. As the weary wander through the rusted iron bars, the souls of the damned whisper. Some will visit with wonder, and others apprehension, and for good reason. For for this place has spawned many legends. Stories of satanic cults, sacrifices, demonic possession, and a wide range of terrifying apparitions have allegedly revealed themselves. But are there any truth to the rumors? What are these bone-chilling stories? What is it about this stretch of road in Thornton, Colorado that has made it so infamous? That is what we will discover here on this episode of Mystery Archives as we explore the gates of hell of Riverdale Road of Colorado. All information provided is purely speculative. I've tried my best to find any and all information I could to the best to fit the stories, and or see possibly where they could have come from, or if there's any truth to them. Riverdale Road, an 11-mile path located between Thornton and Brighton, Colorado, has been a supposed hotspot for paranormal activity for decades. The earliest rumors tell us of a nearby Native American burial ground. When it was in use, it said that the tribe placed a curse upon the land to affect those who would disturb their dead. And as we've heard numerous times before, you don't mess with native burial grounds. Nothing good ever comes of it. More on this later. Over the years, strange entities, those seeming to be half human and half animal, have been known to permeate the path ahead. Could these creatures have been the very feared skinwalkers of native folklore? Not all is evil with this rumor, however. There are both good and evil forces at work. They say that if you see a gray fox along the road, then a benevolent entity has graced your trip. But if a coyote is what you see instead of a gray fox, the path ahead is an ominous and malevolent one. We will certainly dive back into all of these rumors later, but the lore doesn't end here. It was nicknamed closer to modern times for a variety of stories over the decades, and those of which I'll cover now in no particular order. Many people were lynched upon the trees surrounding the road, and many as sacrifices, some allegedly of former slaves by racist groups, and others sacrifices committed by residents of the local community long ago. Whether the groups were one and the same cannot be distinguished. The gates of hell was once supposedly the home of a commune of Satanists. Satanists who would do anything to keep their black church and its practices a secret. If anyone questioned the leadership, or if an outsider got too close to the truth, they would simply go missing. On the north end of the road, not too far from Highway 7, there once stood a large house, probably what most would consider to be a mansion. But the ruins of this building, too, harbor sinister secrets. Built by a very wealthy man for him and his family, the home was once quite the marvel to gaze upon, but the ability to look upon the structure would be short-lived. Shortly after moving his family in, once construction was finished, the man began to change, growing colder, more distant, and stranger. Located back behind the home was an underground cellar, and taking the blood from the lives of those who had gone astray. It is here that they say he used black magic, writing strange symbols on the walls with their blood in order to try and conjure spirits and demons, perhaps in order to gain power and wealth. Behind the cellar is an old burnt tree, which has some lore of its own as well. This was where some victims were supposedly hung and burned at the stake, leaving charred remnants. One fateful night, as his family slept, the husband of the family crept up the stairs with an axe, and without the others knowing, he went room to room, slaying his wife and his children as their blood coated the floors of the house. This diabolical man, seemingly demon-possessed, then took fuel and dumped it all throughout the house, lit it aflame, and then stepped outside to revel in pure madness at what he had just done. Was it him or a demon inside of him? This we'll perhaps never know, but he apparently, once the home was partially engulfed in flames, then took a rope, fastened it to the charred tree behind his cellar, and ultimately hung himself, his feet dangling inches above the ground, as the home behind him was reduced to burnt rubble. Other versions of the story say the man disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. A pale white figure of a woman is said to haunt the grounds now. It can be heard screaming some nights when the wind is still. Those that visit the Gates of Hell area have reported, as previously mentioned, seeing strange animals, but they also report seeing and hearing stranger things as well. Disembodied voices, the feeling of being watched, and the sensation of icy hands poking and touching them. Another very strange phenomenon that's said to exist is bloody human handprints materializing on the street signs with no rational origin. This place, like many, seems downright terrifying in my opinion. But is there any truth to any of these stories? Or are they just that, stories? Well, here's what I found, following what we covered in order. Thornton, Colorado was indigenously inhabited by several Native American tribes, most notably the Arapaho and the Cheyenne. Each tribe had very different burial methods. The Arapaho usually buried their deceased on the same day that the person had died. The body was dressed in their finest traditional clothing, and a spacious grave was dug into the ground. The person was then buried with some of their personal belongings, such as clothing and blankets. Stones and other items would be placed on top of the grave to mark its significance and who was buried there, arguably fairly similar to how the West buries people today. The Cheyenne, however, had a very different method. It's unclear how long it took them to typically lay someone to rest, but their funeral customs were that they would wrap the deceased in shawls and blankets. They would proceed to the designated burial ground, and during the procession, a bloodletting practice would take place, where ponies would typically be killed. They are interesting to me in numerous ways, but they wouldn't bury their dead. They would instead build a scaffold of sort and lay the dead on top of it. This was done in the belief that it would accelerate the soul of the departed's passage into the afterlife. For practical reasons, it is believed that they did this in order to prevent wild animals from pillaging the corpse, which very well may have been the case, but typically the bodies would stay and sometimes decay and eventually fall back down to the ground. Now, curses did exist for both tribes, but I couldn't find any that specifically referenced burial sites. In almost all people's beliefs, disturbing the dead is considered very taboo. Could it perhaps be our collective regard for the eternal rest of those who have passed that have led us to the belief that a burial ground could indeed be cursed? Also, skinwalkers, which are still feared to this day, were created when a person committed a heinous act, like the killing of a family member, and this would grant them supernatural powers, allowing them to shapeshift from a human to an animal at will. They often become coyotes, wolves, foxes, or bears, though they can transition into any animal. Both coyotes and foxes are allegedly the omens along the road containing the gates of hell. When it comes to the supposed lynchings that took place, I found this. In Colorado, it was a cheap way to execute criminals, and the majority of those that are documented, roughly 175 cases, were mostly the results of court rulings at the time all over the state, and the time being the early 20th century. As far as if formal slaves were lynched, this very possibly could have taken place, but I couldn't find any that were directly linked to Thornton. In total, there were 5 events that were explicitly tied to race, but many took place, again, in the early 20th century, albeit as horrific as they were. After 1919, lynch mobs occasionally flared up to dole out public justice. But as more people moved to the state, attitudes towards this type of behavior and action began to change. Therefore, public opinion, as well as opinion of the courts, moved away from this method of execution. When it comes to the apparent satanic cult commune that supposedly lived there, I couldn't find any evidence of them no matter where I looked. But obviously, if I was a secret cult, and I was good at my job, I wouldn't have any evidence of my bloodthirsty existence on the internet either. This now leads us back to the mansion where the name came from. The name Gates of Hell came from the old and rusted iron gates of a burned-down mansion, a blaze that was the result of a madman who took his family out. Now, there is proof of the mansion, who bought it, and what happened that caused it to burn down, but the truth is certainly less spooky than the legend. Before I dive into it, I wanted to also mention that it's more than likely that the charred tree was the result of either the original fire or of a lightning strike taking place. The mansion was originally named the Volpert House. Built in 1864 by a man named David Volpert, this 2-story brick house was a fine structure of dignity. David, who was a very successful prospector, along with his wife Catherine, had 2 daughters and a son. However, even though fitting the time frame when the madman's story supposedly took place, David didn't go crazy and harm his family. He actually would go on to pass away, presumably within the home, at the age of 75. What happened to his family members is unclear, but they most likely moved on and passed away from natural causes. The home, as far as I can tell, sat vacant from the early 1900s until 1975. This is when a man named Dr. Hugo Rodick and his wife, Orion Sally Rodick, purchased the home, working hard on behalf of the Adams County Historical Society. The couple would go on to restore the home and live there for a short time, designating its status as a historical monument. Things seemed normal for the Rodicks until 1 a.m. on November 28th, 1975. The home, which stood at 9190 Riverdale Road, became engulfed in flames. It's unclear whether or not the couple had any children or any that lived with them at that time, but the Rodicks would make it out of the blaze very much alive. And although the origin of the blaze was undetermined, the authorities at the time did determine that arson did not seem to be at play. Dr. Rodick would go on to live and ultimately passed away at the age of 102. It seems as though the Madman Mansion story, as I've come to see it, could possibly be a fictionalized amalgamation of both of the real stories surrounding the Volpert house. The ruins of the home, as well as the original gates, have since been demolished, and the Pelican Pond's open space now sits in their place. Sometimes the truth isn't as fun as the legends that surround an area, and perhaps there could be more truth in some of these tales. Perhaps the area itself is where the veil is thinner between our world and the next. It's hard to say, but one thing is certain. The folklore of America is vast, creative, and entertaining, and it's incredible to see so many stories spawning from seemingly such an insignificant place, like a winding stretch of road in the middle of Colorado. But what do you think? Do you have any stories about the gates of hell? Do you have any stories from your local community that have become legends? Make sure to let me know down in the comments below.